I am convinced that for Ukraine and for our region, for Europe, it is critical that any negotiations to end the war are not happening behind the backs of the key parties affected by the Russian aggression.
The most senior judge in England and Wales has criticised Sir Keir Starmer after he commented on an immigration case during PMQs. The Prime Minister said a decision to allow a Palestinian family to stay in the UK under a scheme designed for Ukrainian refugees was wrong. Hamas has confirmed it will free 6 living Israeli hostages on Saturday. The bodies of 4 others will also be released on Thursday. Officials say the Pope's shown early signs of pneumonia in both lungs. The Vatican says the 88-year-old is in good spirits, but his clinical condition remains complex. And after warning it could run out of cash next month, Thames Water's been given a rescue loan. The UK's biggest water company will get £3 billion. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed down 1 point at 87.66. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.20. LBC weather largely dry with light showers for northern Scotland tonight. Rain moving into Northern Ireland and the southwest overnight. A low of 0. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
There's an over-reliance on a tough-on-crime approach that's worsening the prison overcrowding crisis. David Gauke, the former senior Conservative politician, now leading Labour's sentencing review, talking of knee-jerk policies enforced by political parties, actually made the situation worse. Dave's embarking.
2004, I got banged up for 18 months. The first day and the first night, I was absolutely petrified. The second day and onwards, it was like an holiday camp. Those prisoners were happy to sit around abusing the system.
Chandra's in Newcastle.
Unless we have improvement in the provision of adult social care and community policing, I don't think we are going to address the crime issue.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
You're listening and watching Cross Question with Ali Miraj in for Iain Dale. It's 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm joined by a stellar panel this evening. From my left, I should say, Daisy Cooper, the Liberal Democrat MP and Deputy Leader of the party. Also on my left, quite rightly on my left, Daniel Kebede, the General Secretary of the National Education Union. On my right-hand side is Baroness Kate Fall, who was also, as well as being a Conservative peer, Deputy Chief of Staff to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. And, of course, Liam Halligan on my right as well, economist who writes his column for the Sunday Telegraph. You might want to ask a whole range of things, so much going on in the world. This meeting between the US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia. Also, the top judge that we were just discussing in the last hour saying that, criticising basically the opposition leader and the Prime Minister for coming out and saying that the judgment was unacceptable in this case. And the Met Police also looking to cut some staff and services. Also, you could ask about anything else on your mind. You know the number 0345 6060 973, text 84850. And don't forget, you can also watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
Well, very good evening to you if you're just joining us. I did say it was Cross Question. It's 4 minutes past 8. First question in from Carl in Ipswich is via text. Is there any excuse for not involving Ukraine in peace talks about Ukraine? Kate Fall, you're the daughter of a former ambassador to the USSR. Let me come to you on this.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, look, it definitely did feel uncomfortable seeing the Russians around the table, sitting there with the Americans today without Europe, without Ukraine, who have had such loss of life from that dreadful war. The one thing I would say is I hope it's the beginning of a conversation towards peace. I hope that Europe and Ukraine will be involved with that peace. And I hope that this is the beginning of something positive rather than negative. But look, we all looked on that with anxiety, thinking, where was Europe there? The comments at the Munich Security Conference over the weekend didn't help. A bit of an attack on sort of European values and an ask for us to step up. But there's an opportunity there too for Britain, I think. We can step up. We are both Europeans. We have a close relationship with America. Let's see us play a leadership role. So something that I'd like to see from the Prime Minister.
Do you not think that, the US State Department has said that this is very much an inception of talks. Do you not think it makes sense? You've advised a former Prime Minister, David Cameron. You can't start negotiations with a bunch of people in the room, can you? You've got to get something going before you invite other people in.
Okay, look, it made sense that they wanted to sit there and say to the Russians, are you serious about looking for peace? And it looked like those meetings were difficult. Russia has not been around the table for years for obvious reasons. But I do think it didn't help that the Americans threw up a lot of stuff heading into that. Lots of different statements, some of them walked back, but it just confused everyone and made everyone very nervous. And I do think, look, at the end of the day, the Russians invaded Ukraine. They've been fighting for their lives and their country for the last nearly 3 years. And it is disrespectful not to at least say to them in advance, we're going to sit down with the Russians first and then we're going to bring you in.
Daniel Kebede.
Is there any excuse for not involving Ukraine in peace talks about Ukraine? I think not. They should absolutely be involved in the peace settlement following what's been 3 years of hell for them. It's been a completely horrific time. But what is at play here? I think Donald Trump is establishing his world order in which he wants a settlement to the Ukraine war because he views it as a drain on the resource of the United States. He said very clearly that he was going to reach a settlement with Russia, and he also views NATO as a drain on the resource of the United States. Hence, he's now insisting that Europe pay their way, as he puts it. I think he wants to focus on China. He views them as the big competitor, and that's really what's going on at the moment.
So it's fair enough, isn't it? If he made it clear, J.D. Vance, when he was a senator last year at the Munich Security Conference, made it very clear that the future is going to be, the focus is going to be on China, not on European security, and the Europeans have to step up. The warning was given before.
Well, I think the greatest threat to our security as Britain, to be honest, it has been austerity. It's been the defunding of public services over a significant period of time. I'm opposed to that sort of militarism, actually. And, we've seen Starmer talking about boots on the ground and so on. I think that's a mistake. We need to be focusing our investment in Britain.
So you're opposed to militarism?
There has been an escalation towards China, particularly. There is the number one priority of a government is to defend its people. But this talk of Russia as a threat to Britain, I'm not so sure. I think some of our threats are at home.
Okay, thank you. Daisy Cooper.
Is there any excuse to exclude Ukraine? Absolutely not. It's absolutely outrageous that President Trump is sitting down with President Putin and trying to carve up a deal without Ukraine being front and centre. They absolutely should have been there, and so should Europe and the UK as well.
What's Europe got to offer in this discussion?
Well, I think Europe has been invaded by President Putin, right? Because there's war in Europe.
They can't even decide about peacekeeping troops amongst themselves after a session on Monday at the Elysee. What can they do? Where is Europe in this? Why should Europe even be there?
Well, I hope that Europe will act quickly and come together on a number of fronts. Now, for the best part of a year, we Liberal Democrats have been calling on the last government and then this one to show leadership by convening a meeting of European leaders to make sure that we could use the £20-odd billion of frozen Russian assets to use that money to free it up to actually give to Ukraine to help them finish the war and to boot Russia out. That's one of the things
you
that
genuinely
European leaders could agree to.
You genuinely think, 20 billion quid is going to make a blind bit of difference to this war?
I absolutely think it could make a big difference, and we think that that's something that the government should have been showing some leadership on.
We're talking about hundreds of billions already spent, hundreds of billions, and there's a frozen conflict effectively where parts of the territory are being held by Russia, some is being held by Ukraine, of course, in Kursk. But genuinely you think that the frozen assets are going to unlock this?
I think it's one thing that could happen. I think Liberal Democrats have been calling for that for a year. We also set out in our manifesto, and we repeat it now, that we think we should get to 2.5% of defence spending by the end of this Parliament. We do think that there is conversations to be had about whether there are boots on the ground and a peacekeeping force. And our party leader Ed Davey has said that we back those calls by the Prime Minister. So those are 3 examples of things that we could be doing.
Okay, it's interesting. 2.5%, it might be all a fig leaf, frankly. Some people are talking about 5, including President Trump. Liam Halligan, you spent time in Moscow. You also wrote for a Moscow-based newspaper. You've got a perspective. What is it?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in indeed Russia and Ukraine over many years as a foreign correspondent. Look, I think it's galling for the Western world. It's galling for Europe. It's galling for people who have supported Ukraine during this conflagration. But look, the most important headline here for people listening at home isn't the process and the politics of it and Western diplomats, European diplomats feeling their noses have been put out of joint. The most important thing is that this may be the beginning of the end of the most serious military conflagration on the European mainland since the Second World War, in which over 1 million people have died on both sides. I think that's worth saying, including tens of thousands of citizens. So that's the headline. We've immediately gone into process and what it means for various superannuated civil servants in Brussels, and I think that's actually quite tasteless. Look, of course, it's wrong that the Russians invaded Ukraine back in early 2022. Of course, that's wrong. Of course, that was absolutely outrageous. The reality is, though, is there's no way Ukraine is going to beat Russia. That was never on a possibility.
So why did politicians lie about it?
And anybody who ever thought that could happen knows nothing about the region and even less about military.
Why do you think
history.
they did, Liam?
Having said that, when we see in Riyadh, it's a kind of Yalta redux for history's students of history. When we look at what's going on in Saudi, it is pretty galling to see the Russians and the Americans sitting down adieu, because it shows that Western sanctions on Russia haven't worked. The isolation that we tried to impose on Russia hasn't worked. A lot of the rest of the world thinks that the Russians had a point and do have a point. Russia's been growing by 3 or 4% over the last couple of years when Western Europe has been stagnating. This is just real politique, I'm afraid. What really worries me here is that the way the Trump administration is handling this, not necessarily that the Ukrainians weren't there at the beginning. Look, Zelensky was invited to come soon after the beginning, and now he's not going.
He doesn't want to be seen to be endorsing it.
I mean, okay, is he a serious politician or not?
But what an insult, though. What an insult to be invited as an afterthought to a conversation about the future of your own country. That was always the
negotiating schedule, Daisy. That was always the negotiating...
But the Americans should
Can I
have
just finish my point?
You finish your point.
That was always the negotiating schedule, and everybody is trying to save face, of course, because lives have been lost. What really worries me, though, is that what's at stake here with the way the Trump administration is approaching this. I agree with Kate Fall on this point. What's at stake here is actually the integrity of NATO. And while it's very, very important that this ghastly military disaster on the European mainland could soon be coming to an end, fingers and toes crossed, what's also very, very worrying is that the NATO alliance, upon which Western European peace depends more broadly, could be severely weakened.
Okay, Daisy.
Well, I agree on that final point. NATO absolutely has to stay intact, but the point on which I disagree is that this was still scheduled, and that's somehow okay. I do personally think it is an insult.
It was scheduled.
I do think, whether it's scheduled or not, my point is I think it is an insult that Zelensky was invited after conversations had started. Ukraine and Zelensky should have been front and centre from the get-go.
So I would say, first of all, I think the Americans should have indicated that they were going to bring in Zelensky afterwards as a matter of respect, and I completely agree with Daisy on that point. I also agree, let's remember about the lives lost. My biggest concern is that we try and solve a peace that has no longevity because the Russians just simply, remilitarize. They're already the economy of Russia now is very militarized, rather like the Cold War, and then they come back and take another bite like they did last time, and that's why we do need to settle this with Americans.
But Kate, just on that particular point, you're absolutely right to say that the Russians have remilitarized. I mean, they're focused on moving away from scones to drones, right? And they're building all these artillery shells. Why haven't, to Liam's point, I mean, anyone thinking that this war could have been won, and lots of European leaders have been saying this, but they've not put their economies on a war footing. Why are we not on a war footing? If this is so essential to the future of Europe, why is it not happening?
Because
Kate first and then Liam.
So
please, Kate.
Quickly, I think that is, in a way, the gauntlet that Trump is putting out there, which is very uncomfortable for us. But he is basically saying you've got to spend more on, you've got to pay the price for peace. Now, not everyone wants to hear that, and not everyone's ready for that, because we haven't had that sort of thrown at us in the West for a long time. But that is what he's basically saying.
Liam.
Because Western European leaders aren't prepared they weren't prepared to have our troops, if you like, on the ground during the conflict. Our Prime Minister has said that the UK troops could contribute, as long as everyone else contributes, to a peacekeeping operation in a kind of grey buffer zone, if you like, between Russia and Ukraine. But the Trump administration have made clear there won't be American troops on the ground in that peacekeeping force, and that gives the European governments the perfect get-out to then not commit troops, because they know the reality is, for better or for worse, that a lot of voters in the Western world wouldn't want to see troops on the ground, whether they're in terms of conflict or in terms of peacekeeping. That just is the reality, and Western politicians have not done a good job at all of trying to change that reality.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, somewhat somber note to start with, but I think it's this is the story of the moment, and we're going to be seeing this evolve in the coming months. You are listening and watching Cross Question on LBC. I'm Ali Miraj, in for Iain Dale. It's 8:17.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
Ali Miraj, in for Iain Dale on Cross Question 8:18. I'm joined by Daisy Cooper from the Lib Dems, Daniel Kebede from the National Education Union, Kate Full, Conservative peer, and Liam Halligan, the Sunday Telegraph columnist. Our next question is a text question from Wayne on Canvey Island. Do you think it's unacceptable for the PM and Tory leader to say that a legal ruling based on a loophole is wrong? Just before I come to you, Daniel, to come on in on this, just by way of background, I mean, we're covering this in the last hour. Top Judge Lady Chief Justice Sue Carr said it was unacceptable that Keir Starmer and Kebede not criticised a ruling last week which allowed a Gazan family to secure refugee status in the UK using the Homes for Ukraine scheme and the right to life principle established by the European Convention on Human Rights. Daniel.
So I thought that was a pretty disgusting exchange, actually, in the House of Commons this week. We're quite happy to sell the weapons that create the refugees, but they're not happy to take them. I found it deeply troubling and deeply problematic. Do we accept and should we accept that the judiciary is independent? Yes, absolutely. So, I think it's a real issue when we see the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition intervene in a judgment in that way. I mean, what was the loophole that Keir Starmer was talking about? It's not even
But isn't it a pretty obvious loophole if you design a scheme for Ukrainians and a Palestinian family gets in?
But are they not both refugees?
Yeah, but the point is that, well, they are, but one is designed for Ukrainians. It doesn't say Palestinian on the tin.
I mean, it's certainly well documented that we have sold arms to Israel that have been used in the obliteration of Gaza. Yet we are not prepared to take refugees from Gaza on that same scheme.
But that's a slightly different point, isn't it? I mean, it's a valid point, and we can argue that there should be another scheme for Palestinians like the Ukrainian one. We can argue that. But can one really argue that a Palestinian family should come in on a Ukrainian scheme?
Well, the judge and the judiciary found it so. So surely we should respect that.
Well, it's an interesting point. Daisy Cooper.
Well, I think this is really about the independence of the judiciary. The judge has ruled on a point of law, and therefore I don't think it is correct for any politicians to criticise the judge because they should be independent. If there is a problem there, and if there is a loophole, which there seems to be, then the fault for that lies with Parliament that has legislated for it. So the question shouldn't be whether the judge was right or wrong. A judge can only can rule on a point of law, but if there is a problem there, then it's clearly for Parliament to legislate to make sure that the scheme only applies in the way that it was intended to apply, and to make sure that there are other schemes available for other people.
What's the danger if Parliament is seen to interfere with the judiciary? Because I heard from one senior KC, King's Counsel, earlier this evening saying that it was a security risk for judges now who feel that they're being increasingly targeted.
Yes, I think there is a real problem there. I mean, we've seen it, haven't we, before in the last few years when previous Conservative Prime Ministers and Ministers were attacking judges, and there were many faces printed on the front pages of newspapers, and very judges were very scared about threats to their life. It's really, really important to the health of our democracy and to the rule of law that judges are free to determine points of law, free from political interference. And if there's legislation that we feel isn't working, or whether it has loopholes in it, it is for Parliament to legislate and to make those changes. That independence is really, really vital to the rights of every single individual in this country.
Liam, do you think that it's unacceptable for the PM and Tory leader to say that a legal ruling based on a loophole is wrong? I mean, are judges above criticism at all?
That's a legalistic, maximalist point of view, I would say. I obviously understand the constitutional issues at stake here. But, Kebede is a trained lawyer. Keir Starmer's obviously a KC, a King's Counsel. They're aware of these tensions as well, and the kind of debating point that Daisy just referred to there. But I do think we're in a situation in this country where a lot of the voters feel, and a lot of ministers feel, rightly so, that a kind of unelected legal establishment has far too much influence in the way we prosecute our affairs. And I think in this case, the judge was right to be called out by politicians. This is an issue absolutely central to the public debate at the moment. And also, if you talk to ministers, as I do, often for a living, so often when ministers try to do something that they were elected to do and civil servants don't like it, they say, judicial review minister, using human rights legislation. An instance is, and Fraser Nelson, the Times columnist, has been writing in this area, as well as a lot of the rest of us. Ministers have tried many times to clamp down on claims for sickness benefit. This is now completely running out of control. The sickness benefit bill is approaching £100 billion. That's where we are going. And yet ministers find it impossible to make even the most gentle changes because human rights legislation is used by judges to prevent them from carrying out what they have been elected to do.
But then separation of powers, checks and balances. Parliament needs to step up and do its job, stop prevaricating and looking at the judges and pointing this way, and take responsibility. And if they think that we should leave the European Convention on Human Rights, go and lobby for it, and go and get it passed in Parliament.
It's partly the European Convention on Human Rights, which was designed in a completely different age by British judges, many of them, to uphold a sort of post-war Europe, and of course there's a lot in that needs to be preserved. On the other hand, ministers of all parties, even Lib Dems when they were in power, would complain to me that activist judges are stopping them from doing what they were elected to do.
Kate.
So, look, I agree with Daisy on this one. I think there's a difference between criticising the judge and saying that you don't like the decision they made, and those two are different things. We need independence. We need the right of law. I think she was in a muddle when she came out and criticised the PMQs, because that's the job of PMQs, is to fight over issues of the day. So I think
they didn't criticise the judge directly.
No, well,
they criticised the ruling.
You just said criticise the judge. I'm just saying it was fine to criticise the ruling, not criticise the judge. No, you mentioned the judge.
Okay,
I think it's absolutely fine to criticise the ruling.
I'm a pundit. I can say what I want.
Okay. I'm just saying there's a difference. So I think I think that therefore I think it was odd that the judge came in the way that she did
Okay, so you think it was odd that the judge came in because the ruling was being criticised, not the judge itself?
We should be respectful of the rule of law. We should be respectful of the people that carry out the rule of law. Yeah. But that's not to say that in Parliament you can't say we don't like this and maybe we should look at the loophole. That is what our parliamentarians.
So you don't think Kebede was misjudged in raising it?
Yeah, I do agree with you. Yeah. No, I don't think she was misjudged. And by the way, that was basically a bad PMQs of Kemi the other week. But it's turned out that in the longer run, the issue has come back to her benefit. So it might be that she will be quite pleased.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for this. We should, Daniel's made his view clear. For the rest of you should be the UK considering introducing a refugee scheme for the people of Gaza. Just very briefly on this, Daniel.
Yes.
You think so, Daisy?
Well, I think that we need to have a broader discussion about safe and legal routes. But I think one of the concerns for people in Gaza is that for many people Palestinians, is that if they leave, they're scared they'll never be allowed back.
Well, that's an interesting point. Kate?
Well, the whole future of Gaza, of course, is completely up in the air. And I think what we're seeing from these early days in Trump are all these statements, some of them being, as I said, the Americans say, walk it back. We don't know what the plan is, and we don't know what the settlement plan is.
Do you think there should be one, Liam, for Palestinians? Like Ukrainians?
Of course, we're a compassionate country with a tremendous heritage in terms of handling refugee claims, and I'm proud of that. I'll just say something, though, because someone has to say it. There are many people in the law enforcement services, in the intelligence services at the highest level in this country, who are really worried that a refugee scheme for people in Gaza, not to say we shouldn't have one, will become so porous so quickly that many very, very radicalised people who don't like the West at all would end up in this country, and that would pose a safety risk, a manifest safety risk to many people who live here already. Someone has to say that in this conversation.
Why do you feel so strongly, Daniel, that there should be a specific scheme for Palestinians when there are, there are recourse to claim for asylum? I mean, if you safe and legal routes, Daisy said there aren't sufficient ones. But why do you feel so strongly about the Palestinian one?
Well, I'm supportive of us welcoming refugees. I certainly take the point around people being worried about leaving Gaza, so that in case they may never return. And the British state, I think, needs to be much firmer with Trump's desire to turn Gaza into a Riviera. I'm not quite of Liam's position really in terms of that concern. We have welcomed refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iraq. I'm hesitant.
But are you worried about the dangers? Because we've just had a situation where in Austria over the weekend there was, and this is being investigated at the moment, but as we understand, I think it was a young Syrian had attacked someone. This is following on just days after an attack by an Afghan in Munich. Do you think that that's completely irrelevant to this conversation? I mean, lots of British-born people commit murder and go and steal stuff in the shops. Should we just take this in the round that this is going to happen if we have a refugee scheme?
Well, I think that's... I think that's quite an unhelpful direction to travel, to assume that you welcome refugees and so you're welcoming terrorism. The family, the centre of this case, it was they had a brother here, and it was a majority children under 10.
But there is a case, is there not, with a lot of single young men coming that could be coming from war zones and are coming from war zones and could be very disturbed. Liam, briefly.
Look, the public does not have confidence in politicians, the people who are meant to be in charge in this area. Most British people would welcome a refugee scheme that they were able to feel safe about. But at the moment, we can't even police our own borders in any way. And I think we need to show that the state can operate effectively in this area and not become a national joke or an international joke, which it currently is in terms of our border security. Then we can have these nice to haves, these luxury beliefs about refugee schemes. To say that that's an unhelpful direction of travel, Daniel, discussion, with all huge respect. Tell that to people who've been the victims of terrorism. Tell that to many Jewish people who are scared to come into London at the moment.
I mean, Liam, many of the terrorist attacks that have happened in this country have been committed by British-born
Of course
people.
they have been. Of course they have been.
Germany, I think, welcomed over 1 million Syrians at one point. The ratio.
It's not turning out too well, is it, with the rise of the AfD, surely?
Well,
I mean, we've got an election coming on Sunday.
I think that would probably. I do not think. I am not of the view necessarily that immigration automatically leads to the growth of the far right.
Angela Merkel's legacy in taxes.
I think people's living standards declining and lead to pools of fitness in which those sorts of.
Some would say Angela Merkel's legacy is in complete tatters. I can possibly comment. You are listening to and watching Cross Question on LBC. I'm Ali Miraj, in for Iain Dale at 8:31. The news headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The US Secretary of State insists no one is being sidelined from negotiations about ending the war in Ukraine following talks in Riyadh. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who wasn't included in the discussions, has cancelled his trip to Saudi Arabia later this week. The most senior judge in England and Wales has criticised Sir Keir Starmer after he commented on an immigration case during PMQs. The Prime Minister said a decision to allow a Palestinian family to stay in the UK under a scheme designed for Ukrainian refugees was wrong. A man's been jailed for sending what's been described as utterly deplorable emails to Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips. 38-year-old Jack Bennett from Seaton in Devon has been sentenced to 28 weeks in prison. LBC weather largely dry with light showers for northern Scotland tonight. Rain moving into Northern Ireland and the southwest towards dawn and a low of 0.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
Ali Miraj in for Iain Dale on Cross Question. It's 8:33 on LBC. I'm joined by Daisy Cooper, a Liberal Democrat peer and deputy leader of the party. Daisy, you work for the Commonwealth Secretariat. Are you worried about, before you joined Parliament, you had a real job, are you worried about the demise of international institutions in the modern world?
Yes, I am. And I think that as a Liberal, I'm an internationalist. I believe that international institutions and organisations can be a force for good, but they have to prove themselves.
I think that's a very good point. Daniel, you are a National Education Secretary, a National Education Union General Secretary, a very, very esteemed position. You've been doing it now since 2023?
Yeah.
Are you enjoying it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you still think that British education is fundamentally and institutionally racist?
I think there was some commas that needed to be added into that quote, actually.
But on a serious note, do you think there are still serious issues?
I think Britain is an anti-racist. There's an anti-racist majority that exists in Britain. I think
that's good.
I absolutely do believe that. But do I think there's things that can improve, including in relation to education? And yeah.
On that, we can both agree. Baroness Kate Fool, Conservative peer, also worked for David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. Kate, do you miss the action?
I both miss it and don't miss it.
With what's happening at the moment.
I mean, when you're in Number 10, it's an amazing experience, but anyone who stays there too long, it's a bad thing. Power, you have to have it and leave it. So
very, very, very wise words. And Liam Halligan, of course, economist who writes the Sunday Telegraph's economic agenda column. Liam, is it true that you shared a flat in Moscow with Dominic Cummings?
Well, Dominic slept on my sofa for a few months when I lived in... one of the stints I lived in Moscow, yeah. We shared a university tutor at university, and the university tutor faxed me and asked me if he could come and stay, so he did.
Great. I won't ask you how it was. We'll save that for another time. Thank you very much indeed. Our next question is a WhatsApp question from Nikki in Tunbridge Wells. Even with the new inheritance tax rules for farmers, us poor dupes have to pay more inheritance tax in less time and on smaller amounts than farmers will. Why should there be a two-tier system for inheritance tax? We don't all have sympathy for farmers by a long chalk. And now, just to put this in context, officials from the National Farmers Union have met with ministers at the Treasury today, but they say they were clearly told that the government plans to go ahead with the changes to inheritance tax rules. The NFU president, Tom Bradshaw, says there is fury and anger among farmers this evening. Daisy Cooper.
Do you know what? I'm really frustrated that so much of the nuance of this debate has been lost. This is fundamentally a question about our food security. We are an island nation. We need to be able to feed ourselves. And for a long time, we have not supported our farmers. And I think the changes to the inheritance tax have become a sort of the totemic issue for lots of other problems that farmers have been facing for a long time. So, they face really unfair pricing structures, which means that supermarkets can buy their produce without them knowing how much they're going to get for it. They've suffered with a botched Brexit deal. They've got the UK's trade deals with Australia and New Zealand have undermined farmers and their ability, undermined their sort of welfare and food standards. We have other issues with the Labour government's budget in October, where the amount of money that's going to go to farmers under the ELM system is going to get cut much faster than it otherwise was going to. And on top of all of this, you've then got the inheritance tax changes. So even though we're only talking about the inheritance tax changes, actually it's the last straw that's going to break the camel's back for too many farmers.
So where does the government get the money from?
Well, the amount of money that the government is estimated to raise from this measure is very, very, very small. By their own estimates, it's somewhere between 100 and 400 million pounds. That's tiny compared to the amounts of money the government is raising elsewhere. And I think the cost of this to us as a country, in terms of losing farms, and many of the tenant farmers as well, who have a business but don't own the land, but if somebody else sells the land, they lose their business. That's really, really dangerous. Farmers are there to guard our food security, protect the natural environment. We have to be able to feed ourselves, and we are not going about it the right way.
Daniel, this ostensibly in part was raised because of people trying to use inheritance tax loopholes, very rich people, to get around this, but it's hitting ordinary farmers, to Daisy's point. What's your view?
So I think that the farmers should be kicking the supermarkets who give them a terrible price and then sell the food at an extortionate rate to people and make a lot of profit in the meantime. Look, I've got no issue with someone passing on their farm to a child who wants to continue to farm. There is an issue, though, as we know, with people acquiring land to avoid inheritance tax, and I think that is right. That is tidied up.
Daniel, why not focus on that then? Because this is why people are marching and coming down in their tractors to London, because it is going to affect family farms, and a lot of people are having sleepless nights about this very issue.
And can I just say, the Labour measures don't actually close that loophole for the private equity companies and the big sort of celebrity farmers who are buying the land to reduce their tax levels. It doesn't actually close that loophole.
Have they made a mistake, Daniel?
Well, I think the government are in a difficult fiscal position, as they keep on telling us, and everybody has to tighten their belts. I think actually a 2% wealth tax on assets over £5 million would be a much better way to raise the money. I think that raises around 20 billion rather than focusing on the farmers. You know, taxes are two-tier. I do very much agree with the question, actually. I mean, if you are a hard-working family who bought your house in London in the 70s, what was it, £370,000 that you have now to pass on to children tax-free?
Well, look, I mean, indeed, but farmers would say they're providing an essential service, to Daisy's point. Kate, you grew up in the Kent countryside. How do you think Kent farmers are going to be feeling about this, and do you think they've got a point?
So, look, I think this is a disaster for farmers. I think Labour misunderstanding. They think they're hitting these sort of big landowners. That they have trust. They won't be hit. It's the people who are sort of looking after the land, they're farming. The food security point is a really important one. And look, Ben Bradshaw, he came up with an alternative plan today, which I thought sounded very sensible. If you're going to sell the place when you leave it to your children, then you get taxed. But if you're actually going to work the land and then, you know, help grow food and look after the countryside and the land in which we all live in, then don't. And I don't understand. I think Labour in a muddle, you know, whose side are they on? That's the question I'd have for them.
Liam?
I think there's a lot of student politics in this. Labour wants to, excite its urban electorate by tackling farming families who maybe, they may have husbandry of land, but they're as poor as church mice in terms of the amount they pay themselves, massively cash-strapped. Daisy Cooper's exactly right. Fertiliser prices have been going through the roof. Supermarkets have been screwing farmers to the floor for a generation in this country. And to attack farmers like this is just performative class war nonsense, it seems to me. It won't raise any money. There are ways to stop financiers, the sort of pinstripe welly brigade, from just using these IHT thresholds in order to for speculative reasons. And it strikes me that food security is definitely at risk here. If you want to protect family farms, and we must, there's a £1 million threshold. A farm isn't viable if it's only worth £1 million. That's 50 acres. The average farm in this country is between 250 and 300 acres. That's what it takes. So you could either do what Kate Ford's just suggested there, or something I've been proposing in my columns and elsewhere, is that if a farming family can prove that it's been farming the land for the last 20 years at least, and HMRC will have all the tax returns to prove that, then they can pass on their family farm unencumbered.
Okay.
Farming families aren't wealthy just because they oversee land that's worth a lot of money, because they don't want to sell the land. That's
Understood.
the whole point.
And there are other countries that do that with a family farm tax that
Absolutely.
genuinely checks if you're a family farm or not.
And that's why the strength of feeling is so strong. Just talking about performative nonsense, this is a very interesting one. Kevin in Basingstoke. Good evening, Kevin. You want to ask about something? Go ahead. What's your question?
Will Donald Trump's tariffs damage America's GDP, increase inflation, and damage its reputation like Brexit's done to the UK?
I told you it was about performative nonsense. Daisy Cooper.
Look, I think tariffs are a really bad thing all round. They make everything expensive for everybody. And whether or not Donald Trump puts tariffs on us directly as the UK or on other countries that we trade with, we will feel the ripple effects and they will affect us. But in terms of the impact on America, will it make things worse for them? Yes, probably it will, because there'll be retaliatory tariffs from other places. And so starting a trade war is a bad idea. I don't think it has to happen. I hope that it doesn't happen, because we'll all be feeling it in our pockets.
But he doesn't want China dumping it. Well, to be fair, I mean, Chinese exports of steel and aluminium are pretty de minimis. But the idea is that this is a global war. They want to squash China as well, and he wants to protect domestic workers. Do you think it's going to completely fail? Is he living in cloud cuckoo land on the economics of this?
Well, look, time will tell, but the fact of the matter is that if one country puts tariffs on one product, other countries can retaliate by putting tariffs on other products. And so the net effect is that everything gets more expensive. And that's why, over centuries, people have tried to remove tariffs and remove non-tariff barriers as well, because free trade is a good thing, and it increases growth for all economies.
Will this, Liam, be bad for America's economy and also inflationary, not only for America but for the world?
Just to say, Chinese steel exports aren't de minimis. China produces, getting on for 2/3 of the steel in the world.
In the world, yes.
Yeah, in the world.
The US.
Daisy's right, and she, her party comes from that liberal tradition, one that I agree with, at least when it comes to the issue of trade. I don't agree with her party on Brexit, of course, as is well known. So you've got about 200,000 US steel workers, and they're, good old boys, and they very much at the heart of the American psyche. But 7 million US workers work in industries that use steel as their principal input. And so if you make steel more expensive in the States for those companies that use steel, then they're going to become less competitive, and it is going to lead to inflation. I can only hope that on this, as on so many other things, you take Trump seriously but not literally. I do think, and I wrote this during the first Trump administration, it turned out to be true, I do think he's using in many cases the threat of tariffs in order to impose more free trade. That may sound contradictory, and I'm hoping that is what is going to happen. Having said that...
How does that follow through? Sorry, Liam, I'm totally confused.
Because if you threaten tariffs on other people, then in the end you'll end up both dropping your tariff barriers and not needing the actual tariffs. But between cup and lip, lots of things can happen, and you may end up with some tariffs at some point. The danger here is that, the Mexicans, the Canadians, they're all going to crumble in the face of US might when it comes to tariffs, but the Chinese won't. The Chinese will not. The danger is that Trump and Xi get in some kind of tariff standoff.
Kate.
So far he's only actually put 10% on China, which is quite interesting, given that actually he started off with bigger ones.
Less than
Canada, but Mexico. But look, he's driving lots of different policy agendas with these tariffs. He's trying to sort of push his own domestic agenda on drugs and also on migration. That's part of it. Then he's got a plan that he's actually going to pay for his tax cuts using tariffs. That's another part of it. Then there's the China piece. And so far, not all of these have actually landed. They're sort of out there. Interestingly, we thought we were going to get this sort of universal tariff. And now he's talking about the fact that there are barriers to trade around VAT and also European regulation. So again, we don't really know what's going to come out of this. But back to the question, I do think that Trump has got to look carefully at inflation and also the dollar. I mean, it might be if that both those things begin to look a bit unsteady, that will make him stop in his tracks.
It could lead to a strengthening of the dollar. Daniel, you're a union man. He's trying to protect workers.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I actually agreed with Liam when he was talking about the collision course that China and the USA could potentially be on. I'm quite concerned about tariff wars and trade wars leading to real wars. Of course, Trump is doing this on the premise of protecting American jobs. We've got our own Nigel Farage in this country talking about reindustrialising Britain. I would like to see that through renationalisation of the major industries rather than...
Because it worked so well last time.
Well, I think British Rail was better than what we have now.
We're getting back to soggy sandwiches again. Soggy sandwiches. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Go very quickly.
One small point. I think it's worth recounting the history here. When Trump came in 2016, he said things that absolutely outraged the liberal establishment that turned out to be completely true. Before he came in, it was racist, apparently, to even suggest that the Chinese companies were stealing intellectual property of Western companies, which is absolutely happening. So sometimes things do need to be said.
Interesting. Sometimes things need to be said, and I can tell you a lot of things are being said here this evening. It's all getting very interesting. You're watching and listening to Cross Question with me, Ali Miraj, in for Iain Dale, with my stellar panel. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Ali Miraj on LBC. It's 8:50 in for Iain Dell with my stellar panel, Daisy Cooper, Daniel Kebede, Kate Fall and Liam Halligan. Now we've got a text question from Terry in Swansea. Nigel Farage has highlighted the need for our birth rate to go up in this country. Why is it so low at the moment? Just put this in context. The Reform UK leader was speaking at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London today, saying that, and I quote, "Of course we need higher birth rates, but we're not going to get higher birth rates in this country until we can get some sense of optimism. We need a complete 180 shift in attitudes." Daniel Kebede, he's right, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a huge issue with birth rate. I probably disagree with the reasons for it needing to go up compared to Nigel Farage, who would be very much about protecting the European culture and
Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, exactly. But there is a real issue, and why is that? That's because there is people's living standards have declined. We're going to need more than optimism. Young people need to have a stake in society. They need to be able to own a home and have a reasonable wage. I mean, that is what is stopping young people and young families having children.
Daisy, isn't it also about culture, though? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, look, I think people should be able to choose whether they want to have children or not. I think the real issue here is that there are people who do want to start families and people who do want to have children. And certainly when I think about people in St Albans who write to me about this, they say some of them are stuck in flats with cladding, so they can't get on with their lives and start a family. Some of them can't even afford rent in living with their parents, which is not very conducive to starting a family. People can't afford to get on the housing ladder because flats are being turned into Airbnbs and local authorities have no ability to control that. Childcare is enormously expensive. Maternity and paternity rights could be stronger as well. So there's a whole host of policy reasons and policy levers that the government could pull in order to enable those people who do want to start a family to be able to do so when they want to.
Do you think there is a cultural element to it that we're frowned? I mean, Farage was talking particularly about the Institute of Marriage. Do you think that we frown on it? Do you think that people are getting married later, if not at all? More people in the workforce, of course, which is a great thing, but also puts pressure. Do you think that's an element too?
I think there's a whole load of different things changing. I mean, I think people should be free to choose when they want to get married. If they want to get married, they should be free to start families without getting married. And there's a whole host of these different reasons. But fundamentally, if people choose not to, that's their choice. That's fine. It's the people who want to start a family who don't feel able to because of the expense of things that's the real problem.
Kate?
This always reminds me a bit of my years growing up in the Soviet Union when there was a sort of Stalinist, you got an award for having sort of 5 or 10 children because, of course, their growth rates went right down. But this is also a problem all over the world. But I do think there are some circumstances about wages, about the cost of childcare, which is enormous, which we should address as a nation.
What do you think we should be doing on that?
I think we need to look at, what support we give people at home, the cost of all the childcare. It's incredibly difficult, but I think the paternity care has helped, and I think that has been a really good change in the future. But we need to sort of look into how we treat people who take time off work.
Liam, from an economics point of view, if you look at the demographic trends in this country, it's just going off a cliff. I mean, Neil Ferguson was speaking at the World Economic Forum a few weeks ago, and you can see it's just literally falling off a cliff in every Western advanced country. How serious is this an issue, and what should we do about it?
It is serious. Demography is destiny, of course, and a lot of it, sorry to sound unromantic, I'm feeling quite loved up because I met my new nephew today for the first time.
Congrats.
Little Madan.
Congrats.
Well done, mate. But a lot of this is about economic incentives. Why isn't childcare tax deductible? I mean, come on. It's so obvious. It's egregious to have to pay for childcare, the childcare that allows you to go to work to generate more tax and wealth and provide services out of post-tax income. It makes absolutely no sense. And as I wrote in my book, Home Truths, a lot of this is about housing. Look, back in the mid-90s, the average age where a woman had her first child was 28.
Yep.
And back then, just 12% of women aged 28 were living in rented accommodation, okay? Now the average age when the woman has her first child is 29, and 45% of the same cohort are in rented accommodation. Look, a lot of people like to rent. We need a vibrant rented sector, but the costs are very, very, very difficult. I know in my own life many, many young people who are delaying having families, not having families, having just, one child, which is fine, of course. Lots of families like
but
that.
It's below the
would really
replacement
want
rate.
2 or 3 if they could afford it. Yeah. And we need to build more homes. I'm sure Daisy Cooper and the Lib Dems agree.
There are some developments that I absolutely support. We're building social homes in St Albans. They're exactly the kind of homes that will end homelessness.
Lib Dem councils have expanded the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt's now 13% of the landmass of this country. You know the landmass of this country where you have residential housing plus gardens?
Let me name you some Liberal Democrat councils that are building social homes. Eastleigh, Kingston, St Albans.
And your party has a well-deserved reputation for blocking developments everywhere. So
we have a well-deserved reputation for saying that when houses are built, they should come with infrastructure and they should deliver the social homes that end homelessness, years-long waiting lists, and the absolute scandal of temporary accommodation. The last government didn't do it, and neither is this one either.
Okay, order on the panel. Very interesting. Housing is obviously a massive issue. We should just say that the replacement rate is 1.47 births per woman in this country, which is below the 2.1 level we need to do to just keep the population static. So there is a serious problem. Very interesting discussion there. Now, text question from Lily in Caerphilly. The Welsh Government wants to ban Greyhound racing, which takes place in his local area, or in her local area, rather. Would this be anything other than a nail in the coffin of the traditional culture of this country? Just the background here. Wales Deputy First Minister Hugh Iranca-Davies says the Welsh Government wants to ban greyhound racing as soon as practically possible. There's several animal charities saying they would support this move. There is only one greyhound racing track, which is in the Caerphilly area. Daniel.
So I'm not entirely sure the banning of greyhound racing is the pressing issue of the day, and to be honest, it's not really something that I'd considered until today. I mean, if they look to ban greyhound racing, then I'm sure the same argument could be made for horse racing, and I'm sure the wealthy might not be too happy. I don't
know the ins and outs. I'm not an expert on greyhound racing, but I do go to horse racing and these kinds of things. Daisy, what's your view on this?
Do you know what? I haven't heard this story, and I've got absolutely no idea what the concerns are. I mean, if it's possible to keep it going whilst looking after animal welfare, then I think that is the concern.
I think that is probably the concern about animal welfare. I don't know the ins and outs, but I do assume that it is about animal welfare. In the same way, similarly to what horse racing is, where you have people saying that these are trained for a certain to do a certain thing, and they're not treated properly, and this is all very inhumane.
Look, I haven't seen the details of this particular case. I've been to the horses, when there were the dogs at Walthamstow. I went to the Walthamstow dog races as well. I don't know the ins and outs of this one. I mean, I am very pro-animal and pro-animal welfare, but I just don't know the extent to which, there are issues in this particular situation.
Kate Fall, are you going to reveal live on air that you're a greyhound racing fan?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you and say no.
Don't tell us, come on.
I've never been to the dogs. It seems that we should be able to have dog racing, but they should be looked after properly.
Liam?
More performative nonsense, Ellie, I'm afraid. I mean, come on. The Welsh Government is going to get absolutely hammered by reform in the
next... They've got bigger issues to worry about than greyhound racing.
Election, and this is why, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits that everyone thinks completely mad. A massive decline, a tragic decline in Welsh standards of education, which when I were growing up were the best in the UK. Do they really think this is going to get them votes, or are they just pandering to their friends in the extremist animal rights? Of course, we all want dogs to be looked after. Why keep attacking these working class pursuits? Is it any wonder that so many people across the country have no faith in the elites that are supposedly ruling
you can imagine Farage turning up and Swansea dog track with a pint of bitter, just loving it.
It's surprising that they're giving him the opportunity then to do it by pursuing this. Very interesting.
They're really bad at politics, and they're even worse at policy and governing.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that on greyhound racing. Right, now it's time for the fun question, the time where you instill fear in every self-respecting panellist. Ollie in Sutton Coldfield has come up with this one. Researchers from King's College London have found that British humour is the most common reason why young people living in mainland Europe love watching our TV shows, especially especially in the Netherlands and Denmark. So which British comedy, new or old, would you recommend to our young European cousins to watch next, and why? Daisy Cooper.
It's got to be Only Fools and Horses. I absolutely love it. But the bigger sort of political point here is, we are as a nation absolutely superpowers in the world of creative a superpower in the world of words out. We are a superpower in the world of creative industries, and we should be incredibly proud of that sector. It's huge. It's growing massively, and I think our comedy is some of the best in the world.
Kate.
It's got to be Bridget Jones for me.
And I was the latest one? Did you see the latest one?
I'm seeing it on Friday with my kids, and all I would say, I think it's because we can laugh at ourselves, and it's one of our most charming traits.
Daniel.
For me, it would have to be The In-Betweeners, without doubt. It's just very typical of a, teenage, well, certainly in my day, I sound old saying that now, adolescence.
Fantastic. And Liam?
Well, I'm going to go from the small screen to the big screen, and I'm going to say With Nail and I, because Richard E. Grant's performance, along with Paul McGann's, absolutely fantastic. Richard Griffiths. And is there any finer line that's ever appeared on cinema than "Don't threaten me with a dead fish"?
Superb stuff. For me, it would be Yes Minister, of course. Sorry to keep it political. Very easy one. Fantastic panel. Thank you so much for joining me. Daisy Cooper, Daniel Kebede, Kate Fall and Liam Halligan. What a splendid panel and a really lively discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up, this is really very interesting because it is being reported that an over-reliance on a tough-on-crime approach is worsening the prison overcrowding crisis. This is according to David Gauke, the former Tory Justice Secretary, who is chairing a Labour sentencing review on behalf of Labour, and he said that knee-jerk policies where political parties had competed with each other since the early 1990s to introduce ever-long sentences had brought the prison system dangerously close to collapse. This is something that James Timpson, the Prisons Minister, himself has been talking about, and brings me to the central nub of the question, which is this: should we be sending fewer people to prison?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.